external testing. Okay, enzyme kinetics. So what we're going to talk about here is just some basic concepts about enzyme kinetics and how to recognize some simple inhibitions, some simple inhibitors, actually, the way they act on the enzymes and stuff like that. All right? So first of all, of course, enzymes are proteins, but not all proteins are enzymes, by the way. There are some enzymes that actually catalyze reactions that are not protein, not amino acid based, such as RNAs, for example. Some RNAs can actually catalyze reactions. But most enzymes are proteins, and this is the concern of this course. All right. So they have specificity towards reactants. We call them substrates. They take substrates, they convert them to products, those enzymes. That's what they do. All right? They can be very specific. Some of them are extremely picky. They can recognize only one substrate. Some of them have broad specificity. They can recognize a structure or type of a bond or something like this. We'll see a couple of examples. All right? The one thing important about enzymes, they're not miracle workers. In other words, they will catalyze reactions that actually happen in nature. There's nothing impressive about that. What's impressive, they can do those possible reactions extremely fast and well. Right? So a reaction that can take days in nature will take seconds with an enzyme, for example. Okay? But if reaction doesn't happen, because the delta G is just simply not possible, the enzyme cannot do anything about that. Okay? So this is very important thing to recognize about enzymes. So they make reactions that are slow, much faster. Carbonic anhydrase is one of them, actually, almost million molecules a second. It's something amazing. Much less than that in nature. So how specific are they? Peptidases. We remember peptidases, like trypsin, like chymotrypsin. There are some other peptidases we didn't talk about. Some of those peptidases actually recognize this peptide bond, right, between two amino acids. And they are really, that's all they recognize. And hence, they can be fooled into breaking ester bonds, because that for them is similar enough to work on that kind of reaction. Okay? On the other hand, are extremely specific. Trypsin, for example, can break only the carboxyl of the lysine or arginine. Any other amino acid will not touch it. Okay? So they can be extremely specific, and they recognize only specific amino acids. Now, enzymes usually don't work, everyone. They need helper molecules. And here we have, they collectively called cofactors. Okay? Almost every enzyme needs a cofactor. They're either metal or organic. If they're metal, then we just simply call them metal cofactors. If they're organic, we call them coenzymes. And here we have two types of coenzymes. That type that is actually prosthetically bound to it. It just binds, it's part of the enzyme, it will stay with the enzyme or the protein for the duration of that protein's life. And some of them are loosely associated with it. They simply come to do the reaction and then they are. But they're available when the reaction comes into play. And so an enzyme with its cofactor is called holoenzyme, because it's a holo, it has its cofactor. Otherwise, it will be called epoenzyme, APO enzyme. All right. So, for example, the heme group in hemoglobin, would that be considered prosthetic group or loosely associated group? Prosthetic, it's part of it. It's part of it. Because hemoglobin without heme is not going to do. Here are some examples. You don't need to memorize this, but just two examples of prosthetic groups. Of course, we already are familiar with DNA polymerase and RNA polymerase. We mentioned that they leave divalent ions, like manganese or magnesium. All right. You can see here, those are some that bright purple. Those are some of the coenzymes. And this course, we're not going to discuss much of the coenzymes and the reactions, many reactions that we can cover. We basically just interested in the general biochemistry that happens. But here are some of them. Tetrahydrofolate is very, very prominent because it's important in nucleotide metabolism and it's cofactor. As a matter of fact, some drugs are designed based on cofactors, as we will see in the. All right. What do enzymes do? What we're going to cover basically this semester. They are transformers. They transform energy from one form to another. In photosynthesis, they will transform light to chemical bonds and hence energy. Mitochondria will transform that into chemical energy as well, from electrons in food that we'll see in metabolism into ATP. Myosin will transform that chemical energy in ATP into kinetic energy, the movement. Let's see here. Pumps, those are the proteins that sit on membranes and they basically make passage for molecules to come in and out. Sometimes they end up pumping molecules against the concentration gradient. So things naturally flow from high concentration to low concentration. Some of those pumps will do it in the opposite direction, and hence they need energy. And so they will utilize the chemical energy in ATP in order to transport molecules, actively transport molecules and the opposite. Let's see. What is important about this is delta G. Again, there are two kinds of Gibbs energies we're going to talk about. The one that we talked about earlier in thermodynamics, the delta G, the one that tells you what is the state of a reaction, whether it's spontaneous, not spontaneous, or at equilibrium. And if you remember at that time, of course, enzymes cannot affect this delta G value at all. That comes with the substrate and the product. There's nothing can be done about this. And remember, we talked about delta G being less than 0, and negative delta G makes the reaction spontaneous. Enzymes will do this. All right, if the delta G is at 0, reaction at equilibrium. If it's positive, then you need energy in order to do this reaction. Now, enzymes, there's a system that's very clever designed with enzymes that can overcome this, but nothing that will break the laws of thermodynamics. They simply couple reactions. And we'll talk about that just before we start talking about metabolism. We'll talk about certain mechanisms. All right, the one that the enzyme actually changes, and they're very good at changing, is the activation energy, or the Gibbs activation energy. And that's delta G plus plus. And so a reaction, again, that happens in nature, you can see here that takes many hours. The enzyme simply makes it much faster. Okay? Of course, eventually things plateau because that is the maximum velocity that is reached. So one of the things we need to be aware of in this class about the enzymes, some of the terminology, is maximum velocity, or Vmax. That's basically the maximum velocity that the enzyme can perform reaction. And the way we can measure it in the lab is simply saturating the enzyme with substrate when we have enough substrate. Usually, if you add more substrate, the enzyme will work faster. The more you add, the faster the enzyme works, until you reach a level where the enzyme is saturated. You cannot take any more. And so that is where the maximum velocity is reached. That's when the maximum velocity is reached. Okay. There's another term we're going to discuss called Km. All right, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Now, in a reaction, when the enzyme does a reaction, it will take this substrate and it will put it in its active site. The active site is the site where action happens, where the reaction happens. For hemoglobin, it's not a reaction, but the active site is where the heme is, basically the body of the oxygen. And so when the substrate comes into the active site, it will be converted into something called a transitional state. The transition state, basically, it's a substrate that is no longer substrate, but it's not a product. So the reaction can go either way. The enzyme's job is to ensure that it will go towards the product. But getting the substrate to be in the transition state requires energy. And the enzyme reduces this energy. And the way it reduces it, so you have a substrate and you have a product. This is a negative delta G. That's why we have the product down here. And so the free energy is negative, hence the reaction is possible. So the substrate can simply slip to the product. But in order for the substrate to do any job, it has to be in an optimal orientation, ready to do the reaction. And to do that, it needs energy, activation energy. To kind of lift it up there and then let it slide down. The enzyme reduces this amount, makes it much less in order to allow the reaction to happen faster. Why? Well, for two things to react, If you remember in chemistry, things need to be in the optimal orientation in order to have a productive collision, in order to get to the product. Okay? And that's why nature is expanding. The enzyme cuts all that because it has the active site. It's a very minimal place where the substrate is basically stuck in optimal orientation because of all those amino acids, the active site that oriented in the right place. Once it oriented, it's ready to do the reaction, and hence we have less of that activation energy needed. What is the active site? Who contributes to the active site in the enzyme? All kinds of amino acids. And again, this is why we need that protein, the enzyme, that is protein, to be folded correctly. In order to get those amino acids that are far away in a primary sequence, far away from each other, to come closer to each other to form this active site. So this is an example here where the active site is actually amino acid residues 1, 35, 52, 60. So you can see they're all over the place. Now once this falls properly like this, you will see that those amino acids will come close to each other. If this is not folded properly, those amino acids will not come close to each other and hence will not have a function. Again, that's why we need those weak bonds to get those 3D structures stabilized. That's why it's a very big area of study. To study the structure of a protein. Knowing the sequence is great, but that's really not going to tell you anything unless you see this kind of stuff. All right, here's an example of a uracil getting ready to react in an enzyme. And you can see here different amino acids, threonine and serine, from different places in a protein. You can see how they are engaged in hydrogen bonding with the uracil to basically position it in the right place, position it in the right orientation. Okay? So the active site will provide this by having, once again, weak bonds formed between it and the substrate. We don't want covalent bonds, by the way, although sometimes covalent bonds was formed in order to do a reaction, but we want weak bonds to get the reaction done. Without those weak bonds, the substrate is not going to be oriented the right way. Without the correct folding, those threonine and serine are not going to come close to each other. All right. So there were a model about the enzyme and the substrate called block and keep, which really proven not necessarily entirely correct, which is basically like a jigsaw puzzle. Basically, the substrate will simply fit in the active site, and it looks exactly complementary to the active site we just depicted. But really, the more realistic model is the induced fit, where the substrate will simply, the binding of the substrate to the enzyme will mold the active site in order to harbor that substrate and make the reaction correct. All right, so the transitional state, where the enzyme binds to the substrate at the beginning, this is called the enzyme-substrate complex. So we have the enzyme, we have the substrate, you end up having enzyme-substrate complex. And then that's where the activation energies get lowered, and then we get to the product. So, you don't have to memorize this equation. This equation called Michaelis-Menten equation. It's named after Michaelis and Menten, who came up with this equation. It's a very simple kinetics, basically single substrate, single product. You have enzyme and substrate. We'll go to the enzyme substrate complex, where the energy, of course, the activation energy is lowered, and then you get enzyme plus product, equal product. And each one, of course, has its own K value, its own equilibrium value. All right? And here is, of course, your substrate concentration. The more substrate you add, the higher the velocity is. Until you finally reach the maximum velocity, which is basically somewhere here, when you get a straight line from here, that speed doesn't change anymore, and that is your maximum velocity. Okay? That's your Vmax, which is the velocity of the enzyme when the substrate is in excess, where the enzyme is saturated with substrate. Now there's another term I want you to know. It's called Km, or Michaelis constant. Michaelis constant, by the way, from this figure, it's a concentration, so it's a molar or micromolar constant. So if you reach your maximum velocity, if you take half of that line and draw, of course, horizontal from there to the curve, then you will get to the Km value. So Km value, which I will say a little bit more about in a couple of slides, is basically a concentration of the substrate where the enzyme runs at half the velocity. At half the velocity. It's usually an indicator of the affinity of that enzyme to the substrate. Okay? Because to reach half velocity, if you need that much substrate versus that much substrate, that means you have some sort of indication about the affinity. That's the Taylor's and Method. They came up with this equation. This equation was derived by Lineweaver-Berg and other actually mathematicians, and they end up giving up this easy to interpret plot. Really, there's nothing to memorize here as well. However, I needed to be aware of this plot here because this straight line, from that straight line from the Taylor's Method equation, we can get information about the kinetic parameters of the enzyme, namely the Vmax, the maximum velocity, and the Km. And so usually Km here is the negative reciprocal here is 1 over Km, and 1 over Vmax, and here is the 1 over Km. So from that plot, you can get those information. The reason I'm putting this plot here, because I want to show also a little bit ahead how an inhibitor would affect this kinetic parameters. Oh, I just need you to remember that this simple plot will give you an idea of the kinetic parameters just by reading those plots that intersect the line with the x and y axis. Vmax here and Km on the x-axis. Okay. So, Km, basically, for an enzyme, for one single enzyme, if you're comparing Km with different substrates of that enzyme. If Km is high, then the enzyme has less affinity. If Km is low, the enzyme has more affinity. Why? If Km is low, that means it needs just a little bit of substrate for the enzyme to reach half of the maximum velocity. As opposed, if it's high, that means you need a lot of that substrate in order to be noticed, in order for the enzyme to move on to the half velocity. So high Km, low affinity, low Km, high affinity. They're opposite of each other. Here are examples of Km values. Of course, if I give you a Km value, that's not going to mean anything to anybody. I have to give you 2 Km values for an enzyme in order to be able to see if that's effective or not. All right, nothing to memorize here. These are just Km values for some of the enzyme. You can see chemotricity is 5,000 micromolar as opposed to something like arginine tRNA synthase 3 micromolar. Yeah, I can see basically 3 molecules is enough for this enzyme to pump it up to half of the velocity. All right. Now, with that plot in mind, the one I showed you with a single line, we're going to examine some inhibitors. Actually, 3 kinds of inhibitors: competitive, uncompetitive, and what we call mixed inhibitor. Mixed inhibitor. Okay, those are reversible inhibitors. They are irreversible inhibitors. In other words, once they bind to the enzyme, they bind with covalent bonds. They will not leave until the enzyme is recycled, and you'll have something with the inhibitor. Those can bind and unbind because they'll just simply be weak bonds. All right. So competitive, uncompetitive, and mixed. So move on here. This is the equation I showed you. Nothing to memorize. Again, I'm just using it to illustrate a point here with the competitive and uncompetitive. You have enzyme substrate, goes to enzyme substrate complex, enzyme, and a product. All right? The competitive inhibitor will actually compete, and hence competitive, will compete with the substrate to bind to the enzyme at the very same site. So it will act right here on the free enzyme. I for inhibitor, and will basically drag the enzyme molecules, some of it at least, to make an enzyme inhibitor complex rather than enzyme substrate complex. So basically, it will bind to the free enzyme. Once the substrate binds, the inhibitor cannot bind here because it's already occupied. But if there's no substrate, or if there is overwhelming concentration of the inhibitor, then it will remove the substrate and bind right there in the same place. So what would you expect? Would you expect the velocity will increase or decrease? As a matter of fact, the velocity will not change at all. The enzyme still can do its function fine. But what's going to be affected is the affinity of that enzyme to the substrate, because now it has something else to turn its attention to, which is the inhibitor. Examples of this, of course, hence increasing the substrate concentration will overwhelm the inhibitor, and you can see that. Here you can see how this kind of plot looks like. It's like an X. Competitive inhibitor will simply be here. The velocity will not change on the y-axis. However, the affinity of that enzyme to the substrate will change. Okay? So what I need you to know about this, competitive inhibitors will affect only the Km, or the affinity of the enzyme to the substrate. Okay? That's all I need you to know about this. That's what Km does. And it will not affect the maximum velocity. All right, here are some examples. Okay, actually some are very important examples. Now, this is dihydrofolate, and this is methotrexate. Okay, this is the inhibitor, and this is the actual substrate. Now, what do you notice? They kind of look alike, right, from afar? That's the idea. That's why it can compete, because it looks alike, and hence the enzyme can be formed into binding. All right, that's actually one of the very important cancer treatment drugs, because cells that are very active in laboratory, they tend to build nucleotides, and one of the things that coenzyme that's used is dihydrofolate. And so, giving methotrexate, active cells usually tend to take it first or more, and hence they can be inhibited. Statins. These are all class of drugs that are responsible for lowering cholesterol. I know something about that. Now, that statin, those are really drugs that inhibit competitively the cholesterol biosynthetic pathway, something that we'll be talking about briefly towards the end of the semester. All right, uncompetitive binds to the enzyme only if that enzyme is bound to the substrate. If the enzyme is free, the uncompetitive really doesn't care about it. The result of this is it will affect both Km and the maximum velocity, and the affinity of the enzyme. So you have this parallel. That's it. That's all I need to know about uncompetitive inhibitors. But there are two examples you need to know. One of them is lithium, actually. It's said to uncompetitively inhibit inositol monophosphatase, which is something to do with recycling of inositol in the brain, and it seems to actually have its own effect on reducing depressive psychosis. Another uncompetitive inhibitor is glycophosphate herbicide. That's Roundup. Okay? It actually destroys the weeds by simply uncompetitively binding to certain weeds. Finally, the mixed inhibitor. The mixed inhibitor actually works on both enzyme and enzyme substrate complex. That's why it's mixed. You cannot classify it towards competitive, or you cannot classify it as uncompetitive. And hence, it can affect either or both. Okay? And then you can see that it can be any of those lines that's there. Those can affect it. Okay? That's uncompetitive inhibitors. So that's what I need to know about inhibitors, plus, of course, some examples. All right. So we have, to sum it up, competitive, and uncompetitive, and non-competitive, or rather, mixed inhibition. Right? Competitive, uncompetitive, and non-competitive. Now, non-competitive is, again, mixed inhibitors. So I'd rather you remember that as a mixed inhibitor rather than non-competitive, because then it becomes very confusing, uncompetitive and mixed inhibitor. Any questions about the enzymes? Wasn't that very short and easy? About the enzymes? It's very short, right? Simple, almost joyous. I can see joy. That's it. Everyone joyous, one happy person. Yes? So the affinity of the enzyme will be reduced. So you think the Km will go up. So the Km value will be higher. As a matter of fact, what we do, and I'm on a tangent here, in the lab, and if you take that methods course, you will see that, you will have the enzyme with a regular substrate, and you will measure the parameters and figure out the Km. And then you're going to add different concentrations of your inhibitor. You add the different concentration, and you do these plots until you get that. And then when you see that, you will see that the Km changes. And you'll see that the inhibitor, the enzyme is still running at maximum velocity. The speed hasn't been affected, but its affinity to bind the substrate will be this. You have to add more substrate to achieve the same velocity. All right. So really, this is all. Let's actually have some questions about enzymes before we move on. What's an APO enzyme? Does anybody remember? That's it. If the delta G of a reaction is equal to 0, then the reaction is biochemical molecule. And that's carbohydrates, by the way. Somebody asked me that we're not going in the same order in the book. We're not, of course. And also, they mentioned that we're not going in the same order within the same chapter. And that's also true. We can't cover everything in the chapter. So I try to mention here that we're covering those chapters. Plus, of course, the syllabus has the order of the stuff, more or less, that we're talking about. So you can line them up in the book for more information. Okay? So we're in chapter 11. This carbohydrate. Okay? Very versatile molecules. As a matter of fact, a lot of the metabolism that we're going to cover in our second part of that class will be about carbohydrates because they are the main source of energy, which again going to be the basic part of our metabolism discussion. All right. They can store energy. They are responsible or part of the DNA and RNA. And what part is that in the DNA and RNA? The ribose, right? It's 500 sugar. All right. Cell walls in bacteria, plants, oligosaccharides, those are very versatile sugars as well. They link to proteins and lipids, they do modification, as a matter of fact. Some proteins will not be functional or properly functional unless they are modified. Okay, so we talk about the primary sequence of proteins as the amino acids, and hence they fold. But as a matter of fact, after they fold, they go through something we call post-translational, because it's after translational, modification. Okay? So those amino acids, then some of the amino acids in the protein are modified. And one of these modifications is linking them to carbohydrates, covalently, and hence making that enzyme, that protein active or functional. All right. So the main thing, the basic block of the carbohydrates is monosaccharides. Okay? In proteins, the basic block is amino acids. You bring amino acids together, make a protein. Here, you string monosaccharides together to make complex carbohydrates. Okay, so monosaccharides, and as you would imagine, there will be some monosaccharides that we need to memorize structurally. Yeah, just like we have the 20 amino acids that we need to memorize, except we have much less than 20. Really much less, maybe 10, maybe less than 10. And their memorization is actually also, for the lack of a better word, fun. All right, now we have two main carbohydrates, aldoses and ketones. Basically, aldehydes and ketones. And now I'm relying on your previous knowledge, of course, in organic chemistry to recognize what aldehydes and ketones are. Yeah? So aldehydes and ketones. And the monosaccharides can be anywhere between 3 carbon atoms all the way up to 9. Yeah? We are interested, for this course at least, between 3 and 6 mostly. Maybe we'll talk about 1 or 2 7 carbon molecules later in metabolism, but this is our main interest. Okay, that's the empirical formula. Of course, remember what the empirical formula is. CH2O, and that can be repeated as an atoms are. Okay. So here are our monosaccharides, aldehyde sugars, and ketone sugars. Okay? And so they can go from 3 to 7, actually to 9, but we mentioned that this is our main interest. And so we call them trioses. They have the O's main at the end. All carbohydrates have O's, O-S-E. All right? So trioses, for 3 carbons, tetroses, pentoses, hexoses, heptoses. So what we call ribose, the one that in DNA and RNA, what is this? This is 500 sugar, so it's a pentose. We call that ribose is a pentose. Now we can add another suffix to that name, that O's name, to where we can identify whether it's a ketone or aldehyde. So it will be tetraketose rather than just tetrose. So ketose means it's a ketone sugar that is 4 carbon atoms. We have 2 configurations, just like amino acids, L and D. Except in carbohydrates, mostly we use D, configuration, but that doesn't mean you cannot use L. There are enzymes that are extremely clever. They can recognize L and D, and they are very specific. Talking about enzyme specificities. They can be that specific. They can not only recognize the molecule, recognize what kind of isomer is that molecule. All right. So, of course, the DNL has something to do with chirality, and we all remember chiral carbon, of course, from our organic chemistry courses. So here is our D configuration, where the carbon, the one next to the last, that's named this way, is the OH is on the right-hand side. Okay? The OH on the right-hand side. Let's keep that in mind for this course. So this is erythros, this is free OH. All right. So let's start with our aldoses. We're not going to remember all of those. We're just going to memorize the one that have these boxes around. Because we're going to see those. The only reason, by the way, is not because I'm a jerk and I want you to memorize those, just because we are going to see that in metabolism, and I need you to know them when we talk about metabolism on a molecular level, right? So those sugars will be repeated many times of the course of this material. So this is the mother molecule, this aldehyde. You're definitely familiar with it. 3 carbons. And notice that the first carbon is CHO, that's the aldehyde, right? That's the aldehyde, CHO, which is really CHO, like that, okay? So that's what makes it aldehyde. As a matter of fact, that makes it a reducing sugar because it has a free aldehyde. Now the thing about carbohydrates, monosaccharides, is that they can, especially when we go 5 and above, they can assume this open chain structure that you see, and they can assume a round circular structure. They can cyclize, okay? So some of them, as we will see in metabolism, they will assume both structures. So and they're actually in equilibrium when they are in solution. All right, so glycerol, and it's very easy to remember, because the OH is on the right-hand side. And always, by the way, in aldoses, the first atom is always, or the first carbon, let's get rid of this. Let's see, it's very easy to memorize, really. All right, so CHO is always the first carbon, and the last carbon is CH2OH, always. Okay? So now the trick is to remember the carbons in the middle. We already know tetra and tri and all that stuff, so we know how many carbons are that overall number. So what's left? What's left is to know which OH goes to which direction. Okay? And glycerol is always on the right-hand side. As a matter of fact, to make it even easier, the carbon next to the last is always the OH on the right-hand side. Always. Okay? So here. Now what's left is just those few carbons in between. And that's what makes sugar different from another. That's why sugars, by the way, monosaccharides, are extremely versatile. Just a single change of OH from left to right will give you a different sugar. Will give you a different consequence in metabolism. All right, so that's what we need to know as a basic thing. Now let's now go down this this graph here, this figure. Erythros is 4 carbons, sugar. And notice I just want you to remember erythros, I don't want you to remember the threos, all right? And notice that everything is on the right-hand side. So that number 2, carbon number 2, just like the last carbon has, or the one before the last, has the OH on the right-hand side. So erythros is easy, just like glycerol plus 1. Let's go to the 5 carbon. We're going to have 3 that are important for us in this course. That's ribose, which we know. And we've seen ribose as a circle, right, as a cycle. Okay. This is its open form. And again, everything in ribose is on the right-hand side. Arabinose, 1 carbon goes this way. Xylose, that's the 3rd carbon goes this way. Now, I'm going to teach you another trick a little bit. Now, go down the sugars that we're interested in, glucose, of course, that's very important sugar, mannose, and galactose. All right, now I'll introduce you to something else, epimers. Epimers, it is said that, for example, ribose and arabinose are epimers. They're epimers at carbon number 2. So if you remember arabinose, if you remember erythrols, then you should remember very easily what arabinose look like, because you should remember that it's epimer at number 2. That means carbon number 2 is switched. So all what you need to know for each one of those tests is remember one sugar, and then remember what is epimer with it. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Glucose. Let's see if I will not mess this up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, now I remember glucose, just because I hated my instructor too. It's like this. Okay, I remember that same. So everything that has OH on one side will have OH on the other side, and so that's glucose. Okay, that's all I remember of the hexoses. Okay, I remember mannose is epimer with glucose at carbon number 2. Mannose is epimer at carbon number 2. So that means if this is glucose, we're going to just abbreviate it this way, mannose is number 2, then this is all what I have to do. Mannose. I also remember that galactose, which is another sugar that you need to remember, is epimer with glucose at carbon number 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that means this goes this way, that way. All right? So remember the epimers. And we don't have a lot of them. God knows we don't have a lot of them. We have one epimer here, a arabinose, and then just pick one of those and remember the other epimers. That's it. Is that cool? Does that make you happier or less happy? All right. Happier. That's good. That's good. Cool. So those are the ketoses, right? Triose, tetrose, pentose, and finally hexose. And those are the ones that we need to know. So the ketoses. The ketoses are even better. Why? Because they don't have a free aldehyde group. Always the first 2 carbons are CH2OH and CO. And then the last carbon, that's the ketone, by the way, that's why it's ketone, and the last carbon is CH2OH. And you know the one before it, because we're talking about D, is always OH and H. So what's left here is remembering the stuff in the middle. Okay? That's it. It's really, I don't know, I mean, you guys have an easy right here. Okay. I'm taking it. All right. So what that means here, that means everything, again, is in deconfiguration. Now, the other thing easy about ketosis is that if you know the hexoses, the names are exactly the same in the ketose world. The only difference, it has a ulose. And so ribose in the aldose is ribulose. Same exact thing, 5 number carbon. Okay? Ribose, ribulose, xylose, xylulose, erythrose, erythrulose. This is just something that gives it the ketose edge. All right, so those are the ones we need to memorize. Dihydroxyacetone phosphate is extremely important in that case. We will see that in metabolism. Erythrose, ribulose, erythrulose, ribulose, xylulose, and then of course of the hexose of the 6 carbon molecules, only fructose. Only fructose. Okay? It's open chain and it's circle. All right. So, would you think glucose is a ketose, ketopentose, ketohexose, etc.? What would you think? Doing fantastic. Now let's look at the ring structure. We already know the structure of ribose because we've seen that in nucleotides. This is glucose. Now, don't worry about the name because I'm going to use glucose all the time. But here, they always in the book you notice that they say glucopyranose. Pyranose because that means it's in a circular format, right? In circular configuration because it looks similar to pyran. Again, in organic chemistry, I'm sure you remember pyran and furan, maybe. Oops. Battery. All right. So pyran and furan. Okay, so we call it glucopyranose. Now, the thing that's important to recognize here, of course, the structure, but there is one edge, one more edge in circular configurations. And that is the position of the carbon number 1 hydroxyl group. I don't want you to remember how that happens. That's fine. You don't have to remember that. But I just, of course, want you to remember the final structure. Basically, you will have an attack of an OH from carbon number 5 to carbon number 1, and that will give you this 6-member structure with number 6, carbon number 6, is outside the circle, okay, outside the ring. All right, and hence this carbon number 1 here, so this is glucose, OH down, OH down, OH up, OH down. This OH doesn't have to be always down. As a matter of fact, that is a very pivotal difference. And this is again how versatile carbohydrates are. Not just the epimers, how things happen within it. This is called alpha because the OH is down, and this is called beta glucose or glucose because the OH is up. That makes a big difference. As a matter of fact, that's a humongous difference between us and the plants. That's a humongous difference between digesting certain foods and the inability to digest certain foods. Just because this little alpha and beta. It's glucose. Starch versus cellulose, which gives you fiber and gives you something that you can digest. The reason we cannot digest fiber is because there's beta. We don't have the enzyme that recognizes it, just because of the beta. So this is a very important part of the monosaccharide that we need to remember. Okay, this is the furan, and the ketoses tend to form furans, or 5-member rings. So this is fructose. You obviously see the ribose, of course. Fructose, the 2 carbons, carbon number 1 and carbon number 6, are outside the ring. And so carbon number 2, the same thing plays here, the OH up or down. Okay, alpha or beta. Okay, now because of the free aldehyde and the open chain form of the glucose, we can actually, we call them reducing sugars because they can reduce this failing solution. I don't know if you remember a failing solution where it's blue, you have a reducing sugar, it makes it red, it reduces the copper oxide, makes it red. Okay? So this is one way to actually detect those or distinguish between ketoses and aldoses. Aldoses tend to reduce that because they are again in open chain format and just tell them I'm not there. All right. And so we have this kind of form, this aldehyde group, right? Ketones don't do that. Let me tell you, as a matter of fact, in life, since carbohydrate can modify amino acids, monosaccharides tend, like glucose, if you have excess glucose, tend to bind to hemoglobin and give you glycosylated hemoglobin, or what we call hemoglobin A1C. Now, in people that are non-diabetic, usually have about 6% of your hemoglobin is, and they can detect that in lab tests, through reduction of similar reactions. Diabetic people have about 10% of their hemoglobin glycosylated, and that would be one prognosis, just to detect that. So we're not even looking for the protein, we're looking at who's glycosylated and how much. All right, thank you very much. I will see you all tomorrow.